Bonjour, bonjour. Déjà 11 heures?
Oui, madame.
Bon, avant de commencer, je crois qu'il y a une petite confusion en ce qui concerne la première unité et la deuxième unité que j'ai fait hier. Regardez bien vos WhatsApp et j'ai envoyé une fois encore ce matin les versions finales de unité 1 et unité 2. Et j'avais mentionné bien que this is the final version. Il y avait des personnes qui m'ont même répondu à ce message. Alors, s'il vous plaît, suivez cette version. Although I should be able to give you the finalized version of this course, I'm after his life, the typesetter. He should be able to deliver it within a week, but he's been delaying, which is why I didn't want to delay in giving you, but anyway, you have the content with you. And
Madame, vous avez envoyé aujourd'hui les versions finales?
No, this is a copy of what I had sent earlier. Parce qu'il y avait des personnes qui m'ont demandé si c'était la version que j'ai enseignée hier soir. Alors, hier soir, j'ai consulté ces deux versions que j'avais envoyées plus en avant. Mais je crois qu'il y avait une petite confusion en ce qui concerne les deux premières unités de bloc 1. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai envoyé un screenshot aujourd'hui. Parce que la version correcte a été partagée il y a une semaine, je crois. 2 semaines plutôt, parce que c'est bloc 1. Alors, ce que j'ai envoyé aujourd'hui, ce matin, c'est un screenshot des deux premières unités pour bloc 1. Et s'il vous plaît, suivez ces deux. C'est clair maintenant? Et aujourd'hui, je vais traiter unité 3 et unité 4 de bloc 1 Linguistics, cours 001. Before I begin, yesterday evening after the class, I called up the registrar of the evaluation division just to clarify once again about the projects and the assignments so that there was not any more confusion. So he did tell me that the projects were to be posted to the headquarters, and he was telling me informally the address, but I told him I was going to meet up with him on Monday. I'm going to sit with him and absolutely finalize everything so that this time there is no confusion. So from the headquarters, I'll make him explain everything in detail, although there won't be any major changes from what we have been following. I just want him to tell me face to face that the project can be typed, it can be handwritten also. Because each time, it's such a 69 regional centers across the country, 69 regional directors, and each one behaves differently. Each one is differently stubborn. So that is why now I'm going to the head of all this, the registrar evaluation at the headquarters, and I'll ask him finally whether the project can be typed. So once I'm clear with that, although he's already told me, il m'a déjà donné l'adresse de Project Division, et je peux vous donner aujourd'hui, mais une fois que j'ai complété la discussion avec le Registrar Evaluation, je vais vous envoyer l'adresse. Et la dernière date pour la soumission des projets, c'est le 30 octobre. Mais pour les devoirs, c'est 30 septembre. This is still now, I'm telling you, again, tomorrow in the meeting, je vais confirmer, je vais reconfirmer. Mais ce qu'il m'a dit hier soir, que pour des projets, parce que c'est comme un cours indépendant de 8 crédits, c'est le projet. Alors, il a dit que vous pouvez le soumettre avant novembre, ça veut dire 30 octobre. Ça, c'est la dernière date pour les projets. Mais pour les devoirs, pour les assignments, c'est 30 septembre. Mais c'était possible de soumettre les devoirs même une semaine après la dernière date, mais avec un late fees, je crois. C'est ce qu'il m'a dit. Mais demain soir, je vais clarifier tout ça et je vais communiquer avec vous tous. Also, you people are almost done with all your assignments, I believe, except one remains, that's for didactic. Briefly, I'll tell you the schedule that's going to come up, because this month is also very heavy for me because, we are busy with launching MA Spanish and, being in the director's seat, apart from French, I also have to look at the other things. So after today, we would not have a class on the coming weekend, that's 1920. You will have your next class on the 26th, I think, which is the next weekend after 20th. It's 27, 28, I think. So, vous allez avoir votre cours le 25, and then 2nd and 3rd, you'll have another course with a senior professor who's a specialist in linguistics. And on the 3rd of September, I'm going to finish with linguistics. After that, we pick on didactics from the 8th or 9th of September, whichever is the next weekend. And by the 30th of September, we are done with all the courses. Okay? So you can submit your last assignment set in September. And then once I'm done with the teaching thing, the entire October, we'll have revision classes. Nothing fresh, nothing new. And by end of September, you should know well which papers you plan to take in December. Don't take extra stress. Don't waste time doing things which you're not going to appear for your end terms. So whole of October, we'll do small little tests, little revisions, giving you an idea of the question structures, etc., whatever. So today I'll finish the first block of linguistics. And next weekend, I'm a little caught up with MA Spanish. So we don't have class. But I want you all to use that time in completing your assignments and, your projects if there's anything pending. So that way, just work it out. Well, here we go. We begin Unit 3. Est-ce que vous avez lu Unité 3? Language variation, context and situation. Ce n'est pas très difficile en fait. On a fait quelque chose de pareil hier soir dans le cours. Has someone got something very special to clarify, something very difficult that you found? You could handle it. Yes? Tell me if you have even gone through Unit 3 or not. Well, if you haven't, I'll briefly curse over the course material. I'll begin to share screen. So just pay attention here. Est-ce que c'est visible?
Oui, madame.
Oui?
Oui, madame.
Alors, on fait unité 3, bloc 1 aujourd'hui. Language variation, context and situation. Now, in this unit, it is a kind of a take-on from where we left yesterday. The first 2 units, I talked in detail about language and its origins, its probable origins. I won't say origins, but we discussed some theories which were there accepted formally. And we also looked at some functions of the language, how differences in region and community and groups led to different kinds of languages being used. So this is what we did yesterday, and now slowly from a broader base, we are coming towards a more pointed area. So today we take on language variation, context, and situation. Now, yesterday, if you remember, I told you about something called a discourse. Does anyone remember what I mentioned about discourse? What does it mean? Discourse analysis. Does anyone remember? Come on now, you can't be forgetting so fast.
And the oral tradition, that thing.
Yes, definitely. It's the oral tradition, largely. I will not say only, but discourse is about, yes, Jyoti. Is Jyoti there? You want to say something, Jyoti? You raised your hands. Well, discourse, coming back to what exactly is discourse, I had mentioned yesterday, it's actually related to what comes out. I told you there are two distinct sections, langue et parole. Langue is the existing structure, the standard structure of a language, and parole is what is generally the spoken form, parole. In Hindi, if I were to translate to make you better understand, it's bhasha and boli. You know, bhasha is the larger standardized version, the entire block with all rules and regulations and vocabulary and everything, the ideal language, whereas boli is actually the thing which is performed, which actually is spoken or used. So language in use is the parole, which Saussure talked so much about, langue et parole. And langue is the larger idealized structure. So today we go a step beyond and we are handling what is called stylistics. Now, tell me how do you interpret stylistics? If I say in language stylistics, what does it convey to you? Tell me.
Madame, je veux essayer.
Yes, please.
Désolée, j'ai été déconnectée. Je suis en train de trajet.
Okay.
Stylistic, peut-être, it is the way sentence structure or the way the style of language is used.
A little request to all of you, whenever we are even discussing, it's a kind request to please make it in English because these videos are seen by our non-French students also. So they also benefit from the discussions we are having here. So although I would have much liked you to speak in French, but for this course, please maintain English as the medium of... Ah, vous voyagez, vous êtes dans une voiture?
Oui,
Alors,
oui, madame. Je
please.
suis à Amritsar.
Très bien.
Let's see.
So tell us, what do you interpret stylistics as?
Maybe it is the way, the style of spoken language. Like, as we see the difference between English and French, that the pronouns are placed before the verbs. Over here, in every language, there will always be a style, the way the verbs, the sentence, the structure is the way we construct our sentence to convey or communicate.
To a great extent, yes, I agree. Good, that's a good effort. Yes, Meeta?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I just want to say, like, stylistic, what I understood is like the way you write. For example, poetry is written in a different manner and novel is written in a different manner. So maybe that is stylistic. Like, how do you understand it? Like, when you read, you understand it is poetry. You understand I am reading a novel, you know. So the way it is written in different manner. So maybe...
Yes,
maybe.
you've come closer to the notion. Anybody else? Yes, Anish?
Ma'am, bonjour.
Yes.
Madam, stylistic can be, ma'am, diction or syntax or the tone also. And it is the choice of vocabulary and the placement of words. This can come in the stylistic.
Yes. Yes. We're
Could
all
I try,
coming
ma'am?
together. Yes, Arvind. Yes.
Yeah, I feel stylistics depends on the purpose for which your the passage is being written. So it's the study of language depending on the a particular purpose. For example, you have a particular language used in scientific articles, another kind of language used in literary prose, another kind of language used in poetry. So stylistics, it's a study of language depending on the purpose for which you're writing.
Very good. All of you are coming together to give me a very comprehensive overview. Each one of you has come up with almost correct answers. So I just sum up the entire thing. Is there anyone else who would want to say something here? Okay, so stylistics, there is a very this perception that whenever we use the word style, it somehow means a flamboyance of a kind, or an ornamental use of language. No, that's not necessarily always. Style could just mean how. So very correctly, most of you have said that the way a text or an oral narrative, first of all, please understand that stylistics is applicable to both oral and written. It can be a text, it can be a piece of speech. So how it is done, the basic notion is of how. How it is presented, that determines the style of language. In fact, many synopses that I received, there I have kind of, told many students here that please ensure that your style is true to the topic you have selected. For example, yesterday we were discussing the tourist brochure, and then someone came up with the idea of a tourist guidebook. So obviously here, if you're presenting Delhi in both the different documents, the style will be different for both, because both are differently organized, differently planned, and differently presented. So a brochure, the choice of words, the sentence structure, everything will be different from the way it appears in a guidebook. So stylistics is what very correctly most of you said. I mean, you read something or you hear something, you know, okay, that's a poetry, or you read something, you know, it's a prose. So yes, that is basically what stylistics represents. So why now in the third unit we're talking about stylistics? Because this whole thing started with the notion of language, and why language, on the one hand, it represents the major block, the ideal, the idealized, the standardized version of what is the language. And then we go on to looking at the variations that we notice in actual situations when language is performed. It is very important to understand that language is a social fact. It doesn't exist on an island. Although a lot of philosophers, a lot of theories have talked about language as a system in itself. That is also true. At the structural basis, there is something called a larger format of a language. But in usage, it undergoes minute changes, and these changes over a period of time, they give rise to a definitely transformed version of the original language form. I think yesterday Niranjanji was talking about the diachronic and the synchronic changes that we observe, diachronic over time and synchronic, within that particular time period. So the changes are inevitable. Language cannot be static. It will definitely undergo changes. So how it changes, we are handling different ways of these transformations in this particular unit. So all this comes under the domain of what we refer to as stylistics. Now, yesterday I told you about Noam Chomsky, the linguist who had talked about the LAD, the language acquisition device, and his theories were largely based on his interpretation of language as a pre-existing phenomenon in the child's brain, which was activated and matured as the child grew up within a social context. So he says that that is naturally present, and from a limited number, from a finite number of linguistic signs, we can create infinite number of human messages. I mean, communication and innumerable messages that can be created through a finite number of linguistic signs. So he actually talked more about the language as an existing block. But his theories were challenged very soon by another block of linguists who were sociolinguists, sociocultural theorists. And they immediately pointed out that language was nowhere close to being a static block, because it was like the water which flowed and it changed slowly, definitely, but it did change. And even the language which was being spoken or written in a particular point of time was subject to a lot of influences from outside, like who you were talking to, what you were talking about, what was the situation around you like. All those were determinants in the kind of language that was used. Again, a type of stylistics. And based on this, he gave two very important notions, divisions: competence and performance. Competence and performance. So Chomsky talked about these two blocks in language, and competence is a person's competence, a linguistic competence, is largely determined by the linguistic capability of the standardized version of the ideal language that exists within the mind of the speaker. That is the competence, the linguistic competence. Now, how is this different from performance? Because performance is more like, parole. It keeps changing. Your performance is linked to your own understanding of which language is apt for usage in which situation. If you do not understand the context, you would be using not only the wrong tone, the wrong register, but even the wrong words. I don't remember the name, but knowing a language is not only about knowing the words or the grammar. You also have to know what register is to be used with whom. I don't remember who it was, but someone, wrote to me an email using tu. And of course, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but I did write back to the person saying, "Vous ne tutoyez pas votre professeur." So that meant, obviously, the person had good knowledge of French, but using tu for a professor was not the right way. At least, and again, I'll come to this, in a lot of situations, in a lot of universities, you do use tu for the professor, but in Indian context, generally, for the professors, we don't go and use tu. In fact, we at JNU, when I came from, my hometown, and it was quite a shock, a culture shock for me when we were supposed to address our teachers by name here. Very, very senior professors, we were asked to address them by name and use tu. So that, as a speaker for me in French, I was unable to bring myself to use tu for my professors. But once I realized that within the department, it was accepted and it was the norm, I also started using tu. So the point is not what is correct or incorrect, but within a certain speech context, what is permissible and what is not. In fact, someone who constantly used vous for the professors, or would say monsieur, instead of the name of the professor, the person was actually scolded for that. That if you have been told to address the professor by name, you should do that. Do not call us monsieur, do not use vous. So you see, cultural things can overturn your pre-existing notions of language use. Yes, Ritvik.
Ma'am, I just want to share one example.
Please.
So when I had been to France, it was
Yes.
just a trip of 2 months to enhance the language, in which, being in the Indian context, I started addressing my teachers using madame and monsieur.
Yes.
And I observed that when I used those salutations, they found it a bit offensive. They corrected me. And then they said that if we use it in the context of France, it is sounded as a sarcasm. So better we should use tutoyer. So it was very weird for me to use tu to the prof, but then it was the culture of it, so I had to accept it.
So you see, you faced the same hassle as I did.
Yes,
and once you realize that, then, once you know what is yes, Barna?
Madam, then it is a big concern, because as a school teachers, when we are teaching where to use formal, informal, tu and vous, we always say something that stranger, giving respect with your teacher, professor, and office, you have to use vous voyez. But real life situation is something different. So we must gather some more informations, what is going on in real life, and bring it to the textbook. Many textbooks have been written for schools in that way. It should be changed. No, don't you think, ma'am?
The thing is, what should be changed and what shouldn't be changed is a very thin line, a very fine line. Because if you go on to change the basic cultural fabric of the country where you are doing the teaching learning, it may raise objections from different quarters. Oh, are you teaching the kids to call you tu? So that is something, it's a major point of debate, I'd say. Teaching foreign languages, which is why I say is a very, very challenging affair. It's not only about choice of words and vocabulary, it's how you speak. And yesterday, you remember, I was talking about non-verbal language. One of the biggest concerns that I have seen with people who go to France for the first time, and the cheek kiss that is very prevalent there, automatically you see a certain reticence on the part of Indian students or Indians to immediately do that, because it's not part of our culture. So that being that, there is, I guess, a middle path that we select. Like within that context, maybe if the teachers insist and they find it offensive that you use madame and monsieur and vous, so then you get down to doing tu. Even I did. And that was very much one of the, JLU is the top center for languages. And I was told by teachers who were Indians themselves, but I guess they wanted to follow the French model. So we were told. So we found a midway. For the French department, we used to use that. But in the other departments, if we went to the linguistics center, we had other teachers and we very well called them sir and ma'am. So, there's always a possibility. This is what I'm trying to tell you, is that use of language is also deeply related to your understanding of the context. You should be able to immediately, turn yourself as per the situation. For example, let's say there's a French student coming to India and to learn Hindi. So if that person starts calling the Indian teachers by name as per the French tradition, it would be as odd and considered as offensive as what Ritvik faced or what I faced. But then that is what is, intercultural competence. There's something called a very important thing in language learning, intercultural competence. You have to walk the fine line and discover for yourselves what is correct, where, with whom. And that forms the basis of discourse analysis, which is why the theories of Chomsky were strongly challenged by sociocultural theorists. They say you cannot evaluate language in isolation. It has to be seen what is being spoken to whom, where, when, why, those things. So I guess I hope I've been able to make myself a little clear on that. So from now on, whenever you encounter such situations, look at it critically, because these are all facts, social facts, which impact language understanding and language learning very, very deeply. Now, so I was talking about competence and performance. So Chomsky himself talked about these two categories. Performance was actually what was written or what was spoken, and the ideal, the standardized form comprised of what is called the competence. Say someone is competent in French, but while performing as a speaker or a writer, that person would have to take care of where or with whom or in what context he is using the French language. So you see, there are two distinct parts that Chomsky had talked about. Now, it is actually quite relevant. Then they have talked about syntax. Syntax is the sentence structure. And from the notion of understanding of context also emerges the fine-tuning of your syntactic competence. When you talk of syntax, it's the entire sentence structure. A very simple example is when you're in a very casual mood, you just use a two-word sentence, give that, go out. That is an extremely casual way of putting a sentence. That's also a sentence, go out, sit there. But that's a casual register. Now, if you were to put it in a very, very formal way, you would use a different sentence and say, kindly go there, kindly get up and go there, or something like that. So these are different ways you arrange or reorganize the sentence structure, which is the syntax. These are technical terms you need to know. Syntax is the sentence structure, which determines how competent you are. And a very important notion over here comes of communicative competence. In French, we call it compétence de communication, one of the very, very important notions in linguistics, compétence de communication. What exactly comprises of this communicative competence? It is, you know what to speak, where, to whom, and how. It is not only about knowing the words and the grammar of a language, it's also understanding its use. So that is communicative competence. Then you come to language variation, and then you go on to here again, they have talked about the diachronic and the synchronic changes. I repeat in brief. Diachronic is when you observe changes in language over a period of time, in its grammar, in its sentence structure, how the words have evolved. In simple English, I mean, was there this verb of Googled even there 5 years ago? But today when you say, oh, please Google it. So it's, these are called the new neologism. This is under the domain of neologism, where you create new terms due to new technology, due to new practices, and you get new words which didn't exist otherwise. But 10 years down the line, Googled would be an accepted part of the vocabulary. You wouldn't raise eyebrows at that. So those are like parts of, diachronic changes. But synchronous changes are, remember, they are part of what we were just discussing as competence and performance. So synchronous changes happen during your performance, that particular time, that particular place. If a language is undergoing change because of immediate contextual constraints or change in the situation, those would be listed under synchronous changes. You were talking so far to your boss, suddenly your friend comes along, then immediately your register changes and you start talking in a different way to your friend. So those are parts of shorter time span and synchronous changes, and diachronic is like more long term and heavier changes. Well, then within the synchronic variation, there are three kinds of changes or variations which have been described in this unit. One is in dialect. Now, I had once discussed, I remember when we were doing our units on traductology, I think we were discussing the notion of dialects. And most of you had come up with what is a dialect. So can we just brush up a little on someone? Please tell me, how do you understand what's a dialect? What's a dialect and what's a language?
Madam, a language which the local people use according to their inherited language skill.
Okay, that's how you look at dialect. Okay, and what is language then? How do you describe language?
Language is how one person communicate with another person with symbols, sign, sound, and various other means like gestures, etc.
Okay, so, okay, I get it. You mean the larger corpora of language is language, and it's used locally is dialect. Okay, so somebody else, Kirti?
Yeah, bonjour.
Yes, bonjour.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah.
A dialect is more like the oral thing, and language has the written aspect. That is what I understand as the difference.
Yeah, this is actually one of the underlining differences between language and dialect. The dialect normally doesn't have a script or a written code, whereas dialect doesn't have this and language has it.
Language has it.
Yes. Yes, somebody else? Anish, yeah?
Ma'am, dialect is a language of a particular region or a place or a state, but language is on broader side. In language, we can see the grammar also, but in dialect, it is not necessary because it is the local language, so local expressions, local idioms. So I think in dialect, we can take the liberty of making some grammatical errors. There can be, but in language, there is no. The area of language is bigger than the area of dialect.
Okay. You have a point. In fact, just before I forget, in Hindi, we use this term Anchalik, and Anchal means region. So when you talk about regionality in a language, use it in Hindi, we say Anchalik Bhasha. So that's like, and dialect in Hindi is Boli. So it's definitely got a lot to do with the geographical regional use. Yes, you are in a way very correct. But I'll come back to that grammar bit you said. Yes, Jyoti, you want to say something?
Yes, ma'am. I can say that to explain in simple terms, is the language is a bigger concept where if I say Maharashtrians use Marathi in Maharashtra, but the dialect changes every few kilometers according to the for smaller region or village. So the dialect changes every few kilometers for
Yeah, that is normally said about India also. Yes, Alia, you want to say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, see, in Goa, for example, the mother tongue is Konkani, but the dialect changes very often according to religion and also region. So it's often a great controversy or a matter of debate about which dialect, in inverted commas, should be used as the main dialect. Because in schools, what is thought is different, what different regions and religions speak is completely different. So it's often a big matter of debate.
Yes, yes, this has now touched upon another area, rightly so. Understand, first of all, that every language is also a dialect. But every dialect may not be given the status of a language. The most powerful among the dialects becomes the standard language. Today, something might be a dialect, but because of political strength, because of group movements, social movements, that dialect may rise to the status of a language. Once upon a time, the tribal language Santhali used to be a dialect because of the tribal movements and a very strong, the efforts of the group. Today, it is part of the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution and a full-fledged language. However, Santhali uses the script, the Bangla script, because it had no script. So now it uses the Bangla script, and technically it does have a script. In Bihar, you have Bhojpuri, you have Maithili from Mithila. Maithili used to be a dialect earlier. Now, with the efforts of that particular linguistic community, it is very well a full-fledged language now. So what Alia was saying about the situation in Goa, it is true that dialects which are used in formal situations or by different religions or by different castes, they may be, different usages of the same language, but the most powerful among them would identify as the standardized version and say that is a language. And the rest will be relegated to the status of dialects. Yes, Anish, you're so right. In Hindi, they do say this kos par badle boli, yeah, bani. Yes, you should share it with your friends. I have heard that often. Yes, Niranjanji.
Madam, I want to say that sometimes the differences between dialects of a language may be considerable. And it may be almost impossible to understand one dialect which belongs to the same language. For example, in England, in the 15th centuries, there were in fact 4 dialects, one of which was the East Midland dialect. Another prominent was the West Midland dialect. Now, Chaucer's literature, Chaucer's writings are in the East Midland dialect. So today we can read it and understand it partially because modern English developed from the same dialect. However, there is another poem called Sir Gawain and Green Knight, which was written in the West Midland dialect. And we can't understand the letter of that poem without being translated into modern English.
Yes, that's a very important point.
And another example, ma'am, I give from Bengali, like in East Bengal or present-day Bangladesh, there are several dialects of Bengali. Now, I have seen one dictionary of 7 dialects of Bengali in a library. Now, the dialect of Chattogram, that is heavily influenced by the languages of Myanmar. And most Bengalis speaking other dialects, they find it very difficult to understand the dialect of Chattogram, even though it is a variation of Bengali.
Yes, that's a very important thing you've brought in. I was, in fact, about to mention that the notion of mutual intelligibility, that is understanding between groups, comprises a very important factor between language and dialects. Normally, like you say, it's the regional variation. So when you say regional variation, it is kind of understood that someone who understands the language, that standard bigger language, would normally understand the dialect as well. But there are definite, differences here, that sometimes 2 major languages may be mutually comprehensible. In the text itself, you have an example of Hindi and Punjabi. These are two distinctly different languages, but there is, coming from the same root, people do understand there's mutual comprehensibility between the two. But among some dialects of the same language, like Niranjanji was just mentioning about 7 dialects of Bengali, or you have, Mandarin, I think, and Cantonese in Chinese language. They are supposed to be dialects of the main language, but they are mutually not comprehensible. People using the two dialects are not able to understand each other. So often it happens that two different languages might be mutually comprehensible, but one language and one dialect, they may have a lot of difference between each other. So if like what he was saying, that a certain type of Bengali is influenced by the Burmese, the Myanmar language, the language there, so that also shows geographical impact of that region being closer to Myanmar. So these are factors which trickle in, not consciously, but you cannot wish them away because they just happen. They become part of the what you call the regular usage, and among them the strongest emerges as the standard language, because that also had been once upon a time something like the dialect. But among, for example, in the case of Hindi, all this Khari Boli, Awadhi, or all those, Bhojpuri, etc., they are more or less mutually comprehensible. But among them, what is the language? It's Hindi, or now slowly Maithili. So why I gave you the example of, I think earlier you were mentioning Konkani. Konkani is also now full-fledged language, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
It is. But once upon a time it wasn't. And I think it was just 15 years ago that Konkani was not a language. It became a language because of that social movement out there, after which Konkani was added to the 8th schedule of the Constitution. And it became a full-fledged language. Also, please understand that when we talk of language in the socio-cultural perspective, something allotted the status of a language also becomes open to a lot of benefits. Yes, Arvind.
Yeah, please continue, ma'am. Please finish what you're saying. Then I'll, yes.
See, I was saying when a dialect becomes a language, or conversely, I don't really remember an instance of when a language has been pushed down to a dialect. But once it is, made a language from a dialect, it becomes open to receiving a lot of benefits from the state. For example, let's say, just give me a moment. I have to... I'm sorry about this disturbance. So I was talking about the benefits that the status of a language can be exposed to once it becomes a language. All kinds of state funding. You might have unique libraries allotted to that language, or you might be receiving state patronage for development of that language. Students getting scholarships from that linguistic community. And these are not only done with language, with the intention of preserving language. I must tell you that understand the political drama, in fact. I mean, if they see that there is a huge vote bank or they have something to gain from that linguistic community, you might have policies coming up which favor and change the status of that dialect. So suddenly one day you will see that not a very significant dialect has suddenly been raised to the status of a full-fledged language because of various other concerns. So these are basically impacts of language being a part of the social function and how it is brought in or pushed out as the situation emerges. Recently, because a lot of you here are foreign language teachers also, so I always see that suddenly you find that the government is pushing teach Chinese or teach Spanish. Suddenly you find a lot of push for a particular language. And then you'll see, there is a new trade bloc coming up with India and that country, and the policies should be pushing that language. So suddenly that language will be pushed. So the point I'm trying to make here, I was talking about foreign languages, but languages and how they are placed within a context is greatly determined by its political, economic, socio-cultural patronage and how it is perceived by the community or the powers that be. So that's a very important aspect. As students, next time you keep note of how things are moving. Yes. Yes.
Sorry.
One second.
May I add here?
Arvind, you finish. You were saying something. I'm sorry. I got caught.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to point out the two dialects of French in France. There's a langue d'oïl, which is largely used in northern France and Belgium.
Yes.
And then there's a Languedoc, which is used in southern France.
Yes.
So there are the two common dialects of France. Now, French is more standardized, because there's large-scale education. But in the past, there used to be two entirely different varieties of French spoken in the north and in the south.
What did you say just now, Arvind? Just repeat that sentence.
Now I feel French is more standardized after education has become universal in France. But in the past, a few centuries back, there were almost two distinct versions of French, the langue d'oïl and the languedoc. That is what I was given to understand.
Yeah, so what you are saying, if I may just intervene, because that is the impression that generally, the general masses have, that because there has been a lot of education and because people are now more educated than earlier on, so the language has become more standardized. But maybe it is something else which has pushed out the regional languages, and it has nothing to do with one language becoming powerful. Rather, it could be an artificial attempt to kill the other languages. Because you raised the issue of France, has any one of you heard of La Loi Molac or Molac? There was this certain Monsieur Molac. It happened in 2021. He brought in a bill in the French Parliament where he wanted to put in all the regional languages of France, Breton and, the Corsican language and Provençal, all these regional languages of France, which had been absolutely relegated to the background because France was emerging as the nation with one language, and that's French. So this La Loi Molac, this Monsieur Molac, he brought in a bill saying it was criminal to be killing the regional languages of French because the children coming from those backgrounds were deprived of their cultural, le patrimoine culturel. That's the term he used. And he said, as a nation, the French Parliament should take a decision about introducing these regional languages as the language of instruction in primary schools in those regions. Believe me, this law was about to be implemented. At the last moment in 2022, it was called off because the higher powers up there in Paris perhaps felt that giving the regional languages leverage would mean possibility of disintegration and claims for, independent states or something like that. The point is, we cannot say that Corsican or Provençal or Breton, these languages are weak vis-a-vis French. It's a very subjective term. What language is weak, what is strong? But if you're consciously pushing out some language for the sake of another language, which you claim is superior, which may not be. For a person speaking Provençal, maybe he considers his mother tongue as better than the standardized French. But because French has been standardized by the system in France, so it is supposed to be the higher one. It may not be the case. So that is what I'm trying to tell you, that something which is standardized may not always be the best, but it certainly is the strongest, with political patronage, with political push, and the weaker ones are generally pushed in the background. So go home and look up at this Loa Molac in French, in France. Since we are all students of the French language, it is a very important thing, especially in the light of the NEP in India, because here we are talking about doing the primary education in mother tongue. And there exactly the same demand came up, and it was refused. After 2 levels of approval, it was rejected at the 3rd stage. So you see how political movements can change status of languages. This is what I wanted to say, and that is why I asked Arvind to repeat what he said, because he said as they got more educated, so somewhere, this impression of the standard French being better than the regional languages, it floats, it's natural. But if you think critically, you'll find out that these are artificially created. And tomorrow, if there's a political party which emerges very strong and it promotes Provençal as the language, and suddenly that becomes the standardized version, so then the whole game changes. So language is something, which goes up and down as per a lot of external factors. So to try to understand it from that point also. Yes. Niranjanji, yes, please.
Yes, ma'am, you were saying whether a language has been pushed to the status of a dialect. I think that something similar has happened in the case of Punjabi in Pakistan, because in Punjab, in Pakistan, people are almost ashamed to speak in Punjabi because Urdu is the most prestigious language there. And Urdu is imposed in such a manner that local language or Punjabi language is relegated to a very lower status.
Well, you do have a very important point there. It might just be the case because Urdu is the language of the country, and Punjabi also, because of its apparent links with the Indian culture, may have been relegated to a lower place or to a dialect or whatever. Despite the fact,
Madam, actually, I don't control. I can't control myself from making this. Comment on Niranjan's remark. That is, if there is any true Punjabi in our group, I think that he or she may justify it or unjustify it. I'm very inquisitive about it regarding that.
He's talking about a particular context within Pakistan.
Right.
So that is a socio-cultural, political, I would say socio-political reason why Punjabi might have been relegated to the status of dialect. I'm not very sure. I would need to check up on that. But if it has happened, everyone here understands it's a socio-political context that has pushed it.
Madam, because why I'm saying this, because in Bengal also, we have a notion, that among people, there's a notion which is very prominent and strong, that is speaking in Bengali isn't that much glamorous or that much, prestigious thing. Because if someone speaks in Hindi or if someone speaks in English, he or she is considered as a better, learned person. So is Niranjan trying to bring the similarity like that? That is the same thing is happening in Pakistan in case of Punjabi. I don't
think you can compare the status of Punjabi in Pakistan to English in India, because English in India is the status which it enjoys. As you say that people are considered more educated and elitist if they speak English. that is a symptom of what I call the post-colonial syndrome, which is come from our 200 years of subordination to the British. We still like identifying with that. And look at the same, I don't know if you people are aware of this massive movement called Arabization in the North African countries of Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria. They have this massive movement to bring back the Arab language because these three countries were colonized by the French. And because French, in a way, subdued the Arabic language there. So once these countries gained independence, all largely between 62 and 65, sometime then. So then the native population there started this movement of Arabization and to bring back their native pride, because language and identity and social pride go hand in hand. So there also, because mostly people found it elitist or better educated if they spoke in French, like they do in India. See, India was colonized by the British and those countries were colonized by the French. So the language of the colonizers ends up becoming the elite language, which is largely a kind of a mental block, I think. They are, at the end of the day, French is just a language. Hindi is also just a language. French is also just a language. But this extra bit that comes is because of the socio-cultural, historical perspective in which these languages, the speakers of these languages ruled the countries. So, and in Pakistan, what Niranjanji is referring to is, if true, I have to look into it. It is, obviously, we all understand it's a recent socio-political concern that they would not like to have anything to do with India. So maybe, the Punjabi language is being pushed down. The same way I heard some years ago in British Columbia, I don't know if you all are aware, a lot of exodus of Sardars had happened after the 84 riots to British Columbia and Canada. And you have a substantial chunk of Sikhs settled in the state of British Columbia and Canada. And you all are, I hope you're aware that Canada is an officially bilingual country, English and French. So British Columbia used to be largely English speaking, but French, since it's also part of the country, it's like, English and French. And then suddenly, 7 to 8 years ago, there was a lot of inclusion of Sikhs into the Canadian Parliament. They were citizens of Canada and they joined politics and they became politicians. And suddenly, I hear that in British Columbia, Gurmukhi has become the third language, official third language of British Columbia. So you see how political intervention can change status of language. Most of these people had emigrated from India and they spoke Punjabi, but because they were slowly becoming a major political presence there, so their language was also, lifted up. So this goes on for a long debate. I mean, you leave me speaking on that, I can go on and on. So, well, I'm sorry, this has taken up a lot of time. If there's anything, something different coming up, say, otherwise I
could I
Ma'am,
add something?
very
yes.
Sorry, but just while you said about the NEEP, while our government, and it's very scary, if the government change, maybe the NEEP may not continue. I think it's a very good program for how to encourage our regional languages and the way it's going to get introduced. If it continues, and like you gave us a point that the social political reasoning may change a lot of things educationally as well. It shouldn't happen in India because I think they have taken a good step introducing the NEEP, which they are looking to introduce in next 20 years. So yes, we may see some political changes, but I think they're doing a good job right now.
Oh, yes, Anish writes vocal for local. Yeah, that's very, very right. So it's essentially, a change in the mindset. As I said, it's the post-colonial syndrome. You have to exit out of that. So once you become very proud of your own legacy, with France, you have just one language and they're going on and on about it. Here we have this, enormous treasure of, I think, 1,500 languages and dialects within the country, and we still stick on to English like leeches. So let's get out of that. But yesterday, I remember I was telling you all, we are in a win-win situation. We already have our own languages. If we learn a few more international languages, we are all ready to, take on the world. So let us not shun any language. Let us not shun ours also, but let us also keep acquiring as many as we can. And we are damn good at learning foreign languages.
Madam,
So let us,
Madam,
yes.
Madam, may I make a stray and silly comment rather on the language? Because
That I shall
there goes a saying that India speaks English, but Bharat speaks Hindi. Just a silly comment.
Well. Now that is coming down to, within the country disputes about language. That is something, personally, I believe, I just make a stray comment. That kind of dispute is there to stay. When you had the States Reorganizing Committee way back in 1955, I think, a lot of states were reorganized according to languages. Even very recently, you had new states created as per language use. So these things keep happening, the South and the North and the Hindi and the non-Hindi. So that is within the country. But what is more dangerous is that, we shouldn't be falling prey to this over-dominance of English. Let us not dump, because it's a global economy. We are all integrating with other countries. So let us not dump English, but let us acquire more foreign languages if we can. We'd be there with Spanish and Chinese and French and everything. So, I guess that's a very happy moment for all Indians. So, yes. Let me move on.
Just one thing I wanted to say.
Yes, Anish.
As you said that it was the dangers, but now what I see that the most dangerous situation is the writing part. Because for Hindi, if we say, most of the people, most of my students, they are communicating with each other when they write messages. They are writing in the Roman script, HUM, TUM, TUM. They are not writing in Hindi. So that script thing is going away. Like in Bollywood also, the script which is given to the actor, all the dialogues are written in Roman script. All the social media, they all are writing. The script is getting disappeared. And
yes. Anish, it's a very important point you have brought up. And with the growing influence of technology everywhere, in fact, we have in India the Department of the Digital Technology, which is working very hard on incorporating Google search and many such technological platforms to include Indian languages. In fact, the CDAC Pune is working hugely in this area. They are creating platforms, search platforms, and they are trying to incorporate Indian languages also so that the users can use them instead of English. And what he's talking about, using Roman languages. But you see, at the moment, it is just a matter of habit and convenience. Because even on social media, I guess you have the possibility of writing in Hindi, of writing in Bangla, or writing in Punjabi. The script is there. But you will find that, if you notice carefully on Facebook, if there is some intense debate going on about a particular region or particular cultural practice, suddenly you will find a statement out of the blue being typed in the regional language. Now there, the person is consciously doing it to put ahead his or her cultural and linguistic identity. So language there functions as a tool. Normally, the person would have used perhaps the Roman script, what he's saying, to write Hindi, or simply write it in English. But language being used through technology is still to have that kind of push within a country like India, where the languages are there, but the model of conveying is still the Roman script. So that is again at a different level. When you type and you communicate, there are already, the English language itself feels very challenged with the fantastic new abbreviated spellings and the absolute absence of punctuation and all these things. They are a part of the new digital language that is evolving on social media. So that is again another area we have to look into. But yes, if local languages, regional languages, vernaculars are given prominence in the digital model also, it's a good way to make them survive better.
Ma'am, in Hindi, there is a poet, humorous poet named Arun Gemini. There is a joke
Yes.
of Arun Gemini. He said in Hindi, there is a sentence, train late hai. He said, only hai is the Hindi word, the rest two words are the English word, train, late, English. But this sentence, because of hai, has become the Hindi sentence.
That is definitely the, what should I say? I mean, some things are inevitable within a multilingual context. They are just there, and we'll have a separate unit on what is called code switching and code mixing. So this is when you keep jumping from a hop, skip, jump from one language to the other, and gradually it becomes, a third language. Arvind, yes, I'll just take the last comment here and then move on.
Yes, I just wanted to say with regard to Punjabi, what I think Niranjan had mentioned, I think this movement towards popularizing Urdu with a backlash, because ever since independence, if one notices, the Punjabis have actually dominated Pakistan in every facet of their economy. If you look at business, if you look at the even politics, Imran Khan comes from Punjab,
Yes.
So every facet of Punjabi life, Pakistani life has been dominated by the Punjabis. So this movement towards suppressing the Punjabi language and promoting Urdu with a backlash to that.
That is why I said that this, if it is true, is definitely a socio-political fallout of whatever's happening in India-Pakistan story. Sunil, yes, you want to say something?
To move on from this topic, the Britishers, we are so much engrossed our dialects, everything, but Britishers themselves don't like their dialects. They're like, I have an Irish friend who said, I don't like Britishers at all. So that was my first impression on the Britishers, that they also have many problems with dialects, but we are so much engrossed with our personal local problems that we don't know that there are big problems exist in their world. And George Bernard Shaw rightly said, no two Britishers speaks English alike. So why do we bother them? So
the thing is, yes, we do all the blabbering and we do all the extra, respect reserved for someone who apparently talks very good English. I think we need to, get out of that syndrome. Well. Now let me please go ahead with this. Well, dialect, we just handled a lot of it. Idiolect. Yesterday, I remember in my lecture, I had mentioned this term, idiolect. Does anyone remember what I said was an idiolect? Idiolect is the particular way a particular individual talks. It's extremely individualized. Like within the class, each one of us is speaking in English, but each one of us has his or her own style of talking. That individual style, which is of course mutually comprehensible, we all understand each other. So that particular individual style is what is called idiolect. And idiolect is oral. We're not talking here about written language. This is about oral language. Now, another very important thing I missed out talking about is, discussing dialects. As I told you, each language, which is now the standardized version of the many dialects around, used to be also a dialect at some point of time. But even today, you see, to serve different purposes at different points, dialects may become more dominant than the standard language. Can you tell me how? I'll ask you. How could a dialect become important vis-a-vis the standard language? In what situation? Yeah, Riti?
Ma'am, can I try?
Please do.
Just like we saw one example this morning, Alia had given us. Konkani has become a language. It used to be, it belonged to Marathi, if you see, and it was a part of Marathi dialect. The number of speakers are the one who will influence a dialect to become a language. So therefore, the statement you just made is the future of languages now.
Yes, Sudhaji?
Ma'am, I would like to just point out, I just joined, but it was a pretty good discussion. It's mostly politic. In India, it is politics to earn the votes of the people. Every local language, every local dialect is, you go to Karnataka, in Karnataka, there could be 10 dialects. Each region has its own, so you go and promote that language. I have seen the particular example because I belong to Telangana. Now there's a difference between Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. In Telangana also, there are different dialects in different districts. So each district you go, the politician will speak that particular language and encourage the people to speak that particular language for the sake of votes. In India, it is just for the sake of votes.
You just took the words out of my mouth. I was about to say the very same thing.
Exactly.
That when you have these politicians making once in a while tour of the villages,
yes,
they will ensure that they are talking the language of the
people,
farmer, who they don't give two hoots to otherwise, but during that time, they need votes. So they'll go and try talking in that language.
Exactly.
So language over there becomes a tool. Now, not only for politicians, let me say.
For everybody, for those who want to benefit something out of the people of that particular region, they will go and support that particular language.
Yes. One is the function of benefiting.
Exactly.
There are also other aspects. I mean, this is such a topic. I just go on and on. At times, when you are in a group, you're communicating, and then you want to kind of bring out your exclusive identity of speaker of that language, then you suddenly jump on to that particular dialect while speaking all the while in standard language, and it is in an indirect effort to push out the other. Or if you want to kind of send a signal to someone that, look, I mean, I have my own identity, whether even if I'm speaking a dialect, someone speaking Bhojpuri within a group which is speaking Hindi otherwise would definitely try to create its own linguistic socio-cultural identity by use of Bhojpuri within that group. So there again, language is performing the task of allotting unique linguistic identity to that speaker. So one is when you're trying to benefit out of it. The other is when you are trying to create exclusive identity for yourself. For example, you know, I mean, these days, big brands also, they go to smaller towns, and in order to sell their brands tomorrow, Amazon might just be, you know, using the very local dialects of a small town to popularize its things among those people. So their language becomes a tool of benefiting out of the inherent nature of man, that ye to mere hain. How do you localize and how do you give that flavor to an outside language, how it identifies with the community there? So yes, that is definitely there. GeoMart uses local language. Yes, Geo is at least an Indian company, but yes, when it tries to break into the markets of regional areas, it uses that, definitely. Amazon I gave because Amazon is an MNC, and it knows that to break into the Indian tier 2 and tier 3 cities, it has to come down and accept and, pretend to be one of us. So take it in whichever way you want, but yeah, that is a fact. Now, accent. This, I don't think I need to explain at all. All of us have discussed enough about the accent each one of us uses while speaking, while performing. And yesterday only I was talking about, just a sec. Yesterday I was talking about glottophobia, if you remember, in France also, because they have so many influences on the French accent. And in order to curb those influences of other languages in France, they say that no, il faut parler le français parisien. I'm sure most of you here have heard Canadian French. Have you all heard Canadian French, the French they use in
Oui,
Quebec?
madame. Oui, madame.
Oui.
Have you noticed that very unique or whatever, that specific twang of Canadian French? It's
Yes, ma'am.
more open kind. In fact, you just listen to it and you know it's okay, that's Canadian French. Now you see, what happens is, because given the economic status of Canada, Quebec, they are fairly rich ones compared to, let's say, some small little country in Africa or somewhere. Now, if you condemn the Canadian accent, perhaps there'll be a huge backlash because they are powerful people culturally. But for Africans speaking French in their own particular way, they could be, penalized or, told that, no, your French is not the French, our French is the French. But they don't seem to be saying that to the people from Quebec or Canada, because they are very powerful, economically powerful nations. So again, here why I'm saying this, that most of these attitudes, they come from economic stability, economic strength, and political power also. As India is emerging strong on international platforms, no one, thinks twice why the leaders give their speeches in Hindi. So that's become a practice. And why? Because India is asserting its identity. India is most importantly growing economically and politically. So once, the things happen from the outside, then language automatically becomes very powerful. It doesn't happen in isolation. You just can't go scream and say, no, my language is important. It has to be tagged with other factors which make your language important. I don't know if you people have ever heard of this term, language death. There are several languages, largely, in small little areas, tribal areas, where you have just 5 or 6 speakers left. And after a few years, even they'll be dead. And the language dies with them. Because what happens is that over the years, those languages are not learned by the younger generation. So the languages are not carried forward and they die. There are many languages like that. For a long time, it was said the same about Sanskrit. It's a dead language, but it's being revived. There was this professor of linguistics at JNU, Professor Anvita Abi. She was awarded the Padma Bhushan some time back. Have you people heard of the Jarawa tribes in Andamans? The Jarawa tribes, they are counted among one of the ancient most tribes, living tribes on planet Earth. In fact, they still maintain almost a near nude lifestyle. They have the extremely ancient ways of farming, and they are limited to the farthest islands of Nicobar. They live there with the wild dogs and some cattle, and they have very, very ancient ways of lifestyle. And the government of India has strictly prohibited any outside visit to those islands. It's a criminal offense if an outsider goes to that island. But this lady, she is a very renowned linguist. She went and stayed there, I think, for a year and a half. She got special permission from the government, and she went and stayed there among the Jarvas to compile the oral dictionary of the Jarva tribes. Because she said the language of the Jarvas was dying and someone needed to save it for posterity. Because I think from a group of, I think, 10,000, it came down to 6,000 to 5,000. Now you have barely 500 more speakers left. So extra efforts were taken. She compiled, the words being used in there. And first of all, she had to go through this massive phase of earning their trust, because they never trust outsiders. But she, I guess, she had her ways. And she prepared this dictionary of the Jarva language, for which she was awarded. It's a wonderful work. So what I'm saying is that languages which are in seclusion and have no way of transferring it to the next generation, they die out.
Madam,
yes.
Madam, here actually, what I have a confusion about that when you are saying about the Jarva language, that is, if it is a language, then according to the language definition of language, we know that should have a written form, but or a grammar as well.
Terminology I used. Excuse the terminology I used. Maybe I should have said the oral code or something. Language. Well, good that you're noticing it. Certainly not. Those are the oral code of communication used by the Jarva tribe, and certainly they didn't have any written script. Forget Jarvas. I told you, even Santhalis, part of Jharkhand, they still don't have a script of their own. They do it in Bangla. So yes, when I said Jarva language, I actually meant the oral code of communication within the Jarva tribe. I like when my students begin to get more sensitive about language use. Merci bien pour cela.
No, it's okay, madam. Pardon, madam.
No. So that's a good, and that's my basic intention of making you more conscious about things happening around. Well, then you have this style.
Ma'am, sorry.
Yes, please tell me.
I'm sorry, but I would like to add here. This is exactly what has happened to the Bombay community. They are the Kolis, but there was nothing in written for them. But recently, with all the cosmopolitan that is happening to Mumbai, they have lost their originality. They are losing the language, and maybe, as you said, 500, and someone there has made a research and made a dictionary. But over here, even after having such a community of educated people, I think it's not being restored or giving a thought. Maybe, hopefully, one of us can step up and make these kind of efforts to save these languages.
Absolutely. I mean, as conscious citizens, I think it's a mark of a maturing democracy when people get conscious of saving and promoting their languages. They don't allow them to die out, because it is a symbol of a weak structure, weak social, cultural, and weak economy when you begin to embrace the language of the more powerful. Slowly English started seeping in, and jobs were offered in English, and better lifestyles were possible through English. So it is how the language started changing preferences. Even in Africa, you see, each small little country in Africa, Cameroon, Gabon, Cote d'Ivoire, all these are African countries heavily colonized by the French once upon a time. And each country here has almost 100 to 150 tribal dialects existing, which were completely swept out by the French. Because when they colonized the countries, French became the most powerful language. French became the language of employment. And slowly, all these little tribal languages started dying out in African countries. What remained was French. And as I told you about the movement of Arabization, a bit of it was resurrected in the Arabic-speaking countries. But in the Black African countries, almost what is similar to India, I met a lot of people from African countries, and when I would ask them, quelle est votre langue maternelle? they would immediately say français. I said, no, c'est pas ça. Mais votre langue maternelle. And they would take, 2-3 minutes to think about. A lot of them would be embarrassed about saying some vague African language that no one had heard of. They didn't want to associate. It was like, a pariah. Stay off. I am French speaker. That is how languages die. But today, with Africa now slowly coming up, I have a friend who's from Gabon, and he's a professor of physics in the City University of New York, and he started this movement of teaching online indigenous African dialects and languages. So what I'm saying is, I don't know how successful it would be, but at least he's got this consciousness of dumping the outside languages and doing something for his own. That is very important. And as Indians, I think, well, the movement has already started. So, well, it's a happy time for us.
Other language,
yes.
ma'am, they don't have any script. They never tried to script it.
Who?
Do they have any letter like this Jarwa language and other languages? Do they have
nothing
alphabet?
Written? They have no written. If you go and look up the internet, what it means by Jarwas, they are, they are equivalent to the Neanderthals on this planet. That is the lifestyle they follow. But when the tsunami struck, that entire land block near the Andaman Nicobar Islands, if people are aware, some of it actually physically shifted because of the impact of the earthquake in that point. All these sophisticated machinery, the weather reporting and the earthquake reporting, they failed. They had not been able to predict the tsunami or the earthquake. Not a single Jarwa person died in the tsunami. You know why? Because they had their own systems of intelligence, of understanding that there was something about to happen. It was said that they are so closely linked to the earth, the movement of the way the soil looks like, the way the dogs bark, that they went and sat on the topmost branches of the trees there. And not a single Jarwa died, because they understand nature in ways that most sophisticated machines couldn't. So, you have your interpretations. We say Jarwas are the most backward people, but how come they are the ones who were saved totally? Because they understood nature much more than our machines could. So that is what I'm saying, that in this new education policy, there's a very important component. They have tried to bring indigenous knowledge systems existing. And many institutions have been encouraged to take up tribal languages within the larger curriculum framework. So those are ways of bringing in knowledge which so far existed. वो तो जंगलियों का knowledge है, that's a larger perception. वो तो जंगली हैं, जंगल में रहने वाले. No, but they have their own intelligence. They have their own logic. And if we don't understand, that doesn't mean it is not there. So when you incorporate those, I'm not going to use the word weaker, I would say something which is very different from the mainstream. You try to learn from them as well. That is when a culture like ours grows totally. It's a larger phenomenon. We learn from our tribal communities also, instead of dismissing them like wo to jungle mein rehte hain. They know much more about the flora and the fauna and the kind of medicinal roots and herbs found there. So we have to accept that and incorporate. That is what I call a maturing democracy here. The same with Africa. Those people said, c'est la mission civilisatrice. It's a typical French term they used to say we are here to civilize you. Why? They were not civilized. They had their civilization. You came as outsiders. You plundered their land. And then you say that you are on a mission civilisatrice. So the cultures were perishing that way. But I guess now it's a wake-up time for the world, and it's slowly, and people are waking up. That period of colonization was terrible. But again, be aware of this, that it is not only political colonization which posed a danger. Now it is a colonization of a different sort. It's an economic colonization. I'll give you a little example. China has, had given a lot of loans to a lot of African countries. And with the condition that if they were unable to repay the debt, they would take over the ports. They knew very well that those poor countries there, they wouldn't be able to repay that kind of huge debts that the political leaders had accepted. And then slowly what happens, that China starts creeping in there. And there is this particular institute in China of the Chinese government, just like you have the Alliance and the Spanish Cultural Center. You have the Chinese Language Teaching Center under the government of China, which has its Chinese language institutes across the world. And suddenly you have numerous, these institutions springing up in Africa. Why? Because now they are treading into Africa and they are spreading Chinese language among the Africans. So it is not only political colonization, which was a threat once upon a time. Now it is, yes, Confucius Institute. Ashita, yes, very, very right. Merci. The Confucius Institute. And not only in Africa. Allow me to tell you that they have entered Mauritius as well. If you know the history of Mauritius, Mauritius was earlier the sugarcane plantation hub where indentured labor was carried from, in Sri Lanka also, Adita, yes. The indentured labor from Bihar and UP was carried to Mauritius. And there they had the British, or at times the French, owners of the land who made them work, on supposed contractual terms, but they had a terrible lifestyle there. So in Mauritius also, it was a kind of a major battle for linguistic and cultural identity of the indentured labor which was carried from here. And it would be a very interesting study for each one of you if you can go and read on how the indentured labor largely from India, from other countries as well, from Sri Lanka, even from Southeast Asia, they were carried there, and how a third culture emerged there in Mauritius within a space of a larger Francophone boss or a British boss. It emerged there. And I always say that's one of the unique combinations that I find in Mauritius is Bhojpuri and French. Because a lot of people went there from the Bhojpuri-speaking areas, and gradually they mixed up with the French language, and what you have today is a very amazing mix of the two languages. So these are the ways, le va et le vient des langues. So that is a very interesting phenomenon. Oh, I guess Yes, Chanchal, I agree with you, but I'm so sorry, I have to move on, please.
No, actually, ma'am, that's what I'm going to say. That is, if we don't put that much importance upon that written form of language, because language from in the Aboriginal phase of the human beings, when they used to draw pictures to communicate, actually, to communicate, we do so many things like gesturing even, suppose. When someone nowadays, when someone can't speak, can't hear, they mime it. They have their own language, sign language that is called. So language shouldn't have that proper grammatical form always. If we, I think, in my opinion, that if we make it a little broader, then I think the definition would be much flexible. That's what is my opinion.
One of the prime ways of conserving language, conservation of languages, you have these oral dictionaries coming up very strongly, where you don't have written words, but you have recorded words. It's an oral dictionary. And that is what that lady in the Jarwa land had compiled, because they don't know how to write, but she compiled the oral data. And that data, because see, languages, like I was telling you yesterday, after all, what is a language? It is a data compilation of various sounds strung into words, strung into sentences, and then it becomes a language. So when you record, when you have an oral compilation of those dying languages, you have already found a way to conserve them. And these recordings can be further, taken and perhaps use another script of another language, like Santali uses Bangla script, and perhaps write it down and save it for posterity. After all, that's how civilization moves. So now we move on. In the style factor of language variation, in your unit, you'll find there are 5 categories of what should I say, language change that is possible, language deviation. One is frozen. That category is called frozen. Frozen is like when you have a very specific technical command. You have these put on signboards, no smoking. That is also a sentence, but it's a style which is very frozen. You cannot, make it more ornamental because it's a command. It's a very specific command. So those styles are called frozen style. Frozen as in minimum possibility of deviation. Then you have formal style. Formal is like a formal code with, the examples that you have in your unit. If you read, you have a formal way of conveying the message. Like if you want to tell someone to leave by the exit at the rear, you say visitors should leave by the exits at the rear. Then there's another style, which is called consultative. Then consultative means you're giving a possibility of, an open-ended kind of a situation. So you say, would you mind leaving by the exits at the rear? So there is a possibility of a question asked and a possibility of discussion. Sorry. Casual is casual, like you could leave by the door at the back. And an intimate or totally informal style would be out you go by the back door. So that's the most informal style of speaking. This example, in fact, shows you how the same message can be as a frozen statement or a consultative statement, formal, informal, various styles of use. So that is that. And after this, the situation and context, I think we have had enough discussion on that. Register is again another component of language variation where you talk about certain topics in certain ways. For example, you have manuals for operating a certain machine. You have a particular style in which the manual is written. So those are registers. And suppose you are talking about something, it's a newspaper article. So that has a journalistic register about it. There's a certain style, a journalistic style for a newspaper. That would not be like how you draft a manual. So what they're trying to say that there's a certain register about anything. There's a certain way, a certain style in which a text is drafted. And there, with that, I come to the end of this unit, but I am sure I have reached, okay, I still have 15 minutes more to go with this extraordinary discussion we had today. I am done with Unit 3. Allow me to now go to Unit 4. Has any one of you read through Unit 4? Has any one of you gone through your Unit 4? Be honest and tell me, have you read it or not?
No, madam.
No, madam.
No, wow.
No, madam.
That is sad. You see, when I introduced this course of linguistics,
we planned to, but we couldn't rather. sorry.
I know each one of you is very caught up. I understand your situation, but please understand that as students of advanced studies in any language, linguistics is the core of it all. You know, if you understand linguistics well, you do well in any language. So, and also, I think a lot of you are doing a reverse gear study. Now that you have your assignments before you, you are going by the questions in the assignments and not reading what is not there in the questions. So kindly don't do that, because assignments, of course, they cover a certain part, but you also have your term end exams coming. So don't ignore. At the moment, maybe you were a little pressed for time, but kindly read. And these are very important parts. They give you an insight into the science of language that at the end of it all, we're all doing. So do take it seriously. So this unit 4 is about, is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see language and thought?
No, madam. No, ma'am. No, madam.
No,
madam.
ma'am.
No, madam, we can't see your screen.
Yeah, 1 sec. That's what. Let me share it. Now is it visible?
Ma'am?
Do you see it now?
Okay.
Oui, madam.
Okay, yeah.
Yes,
Someone
ma'am.
wanted to ask me something?
Yes, ma'am. Yesterday I was and you already discussed related to the project work related to brochure. I know everything you had explained. Only one thing, we cannot introduce any art.
Your line is breaking, Barna. If you can, maybe you could type it up.
Okay, I will take you. Okay.
Or maybe you could send me an independent message later, because I'm running a little short on time. I want to complete this.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Ashita, you have submitted your synopsis. I still haven't. I don't think I've seen it. After the class, I'll take a look. I just take this opportunity to announce once again that yesterday, since we discussed that the tourist brochure could also be compiled in the form of a tourist guidebook, I shall now make it a little more open, and you can also compile it in the form of a guidebook. And what all we are discussing about style and language use, understand that a tourist guide book would be compiled differently than a brochure. So if you want to do a tourist guide, then write it in a separate style. If you're making it in the form of a brochure, do it differently. Just to remind you once again. Now, coming back to the 4th unit, language and thought. My screen is visible, I hope.
Oui, madam.
Yes.
Oui, madam.
Now, in brief, I just tell you that when you talk of language as a component, there are some schools of thought which say that your thought process, what you have in your mind, is also a function of the language that you know. Which is why also they say the many more languages you know, the larger is your repository of thought. The more words you know, the more notions you are open to, and therefore you can think far and wide. Which is again the basis of the statement that monolingual kids are, they perform lower than bilingual or multilingual kids. Simply put, exposure to more languages expands your horizon of thought. This is what this unit is all about. Since these units are compiled in English, they are pretty easy to understand if you take out time to read through. I'll just go through very important components in the units and try to present it here. The linguistic sign, they talk about the linguistic sign. Remember yesterday I talked about the arbitrariness of linguistic sign when I said that the word dog in no way resembles the actual animal. But because of societal and linguistic convention, because we have decided to name that particular animal dog, so we know that when you say a dog, you mean that animal. So that is the arbitrariness of human language, and which is again linked to what I said, the more languages you know, the larger your scope of understanding and your scope of perception becomes. For example, in the Indian context, we have, I think, more terminologies for rice, in the rice belt. You'd say, someone says bhat. Someone
Madam,
says, yes.
Madam, pardon, madam. Actually, when I read that, what I found confusing, that is, or not confusing actually, what is intriguing, that is, and that I felt actually from the very beginning when I've been, learning the languages. That is how the most difficult part of the language is the abstract words, when one can't even feel it, like something like mind, or something, even not air, because air we can feel it. We can feel, when we can feel something with touch, with our senses. I think those words are most difficult to express and to make other person understand, who belongs to a different language.
I'll just come to that, Tamchin. I do agree with what you say. At the moment, I'm talking about very concrete reality around you. And because of apparent cultural and geographical differences between cultures and between countries, you have different things that you perceive with your senses. Like I was giving you example of rice. For us, it's rice, it's bhat, it's chawal, it's, I don't know, some regions might use some other, way. Well, those would be different languages, but within the same language, let's say the notion of rain, barish, pani, then you have a puhar, then you have this very minute rains, droplets, they say jissi. These are various forms of the same thing, not exactly of the same thing. There are different ways you perceive them. And for someone coming from another culture, maybe someone coming from Rajasthan, which barely has any rain, for them, it would be difficult to understand because they have not been exposed to that. The example given in the unit is also, in English, we have two words for ice and snow. Ice, the frozen thing, and snow, the snowflakes which fall. But in Eskimo land, you have 17 terms for snow, because they also have a different way of perceiving the snow which is all around them, and I'm sure they have reasons why a particular type of snow is named differently. So depending upon the context around you, everything is contextually, the notional existence has to be there, which is again going back, see, these are all linked. When you were doing our translation units, I told you there is that notion of non-translatability, because the notion itself doesn't exist in the other language. So how do you talk about, the notion of jhutha? Jhutha is something in India we consider ki ye to jhutha ho gaya. Or the notion of aanchal, maa ka aanchal. That is a larger connotation within the culture, within the notion of motherhood. Those things are very complex and culture related. In India, when you say Ganga, it's not only a river, it's a whole cultural notion of Ganga, its purity, its the links in the epics. It's a lot more that one word expressing. So the thing is that when you allot a certain word to a certain concept, it is most of the time emerging from that particular context. Now, what Chanchal was referring to is the abstract notions. Has any one of you come across this notion of onomatopoeia? Have you people heard of this word, onomatopic words?
Yes, ma'am.
What is it?
The words that are created based on their sound, like honk honk.
Voila.
For pain, you say I the pain. You say that.
Yeah, I mean, they are not really words, but they are taking on from the way they are perceived or they are heard.
Right.
Bang, bang, ding dong, chin chin. You have different ways of perceiving these abstract notions, which are again put in the language through this notion of onomatopic words. So the closest, like, I could come to what you were referring to, Chanchal, is, you know, this usage and the entry of onomatopic words within the
No,
formal.
madam, pardon,
Yes.
madam. Actually, no, I wanted to mean something different. Like there are some words which are quite unknown to the person belonging to another language. Like suppose in Hindi or Bengali we have a word which is Abhiman. Now, I really haven't found any alternative to that word in English. I don't know that it's because of my lack of knowledge that could be, but such things exist in other languages also, which we don't have in our languages. Which that is not like sounds, onomatopic things, but some concepts like love. Love, we know in every languages that exists, and we know about that. The concept we are very acquainted with. But some things like Abhiman, that's what.
First of all, Chanchal, I know what you're trying to say. It's about the non-existence of that very notion in another language, which makes it very difficult for the outsider to comprehend what you're trying to say, because that thing doesn't exist. As for the choice of example that you took, Abhiman has its complexity because the word Abhiman in Hindi does not mean the same Abhiman in Bangla. In Bangla, it is kind of, you know, reserving your pride and kind of a sense of hurt, which is accompanied by the reaction, or Abhiman hoyeche. So that Abhiman is not the same as Abhiman in Hindi, which is more to do with he's a proud man. Usko abhiman hai, apne gyan ka abhiman hai. So these two words, I'd rather compare it to the word réalisation in French. Often the ones who are learning French in India, they think réalisation is about to realize, whereas in French it actually means to direct. Réalisateur in French is the director of a film, whereas in English, if you say realize, it's to realize something. And that in French is rendre compte. So these are, you know, I don't know if you're aware of it. If you did this notion of faux amis while in your translation, false friends.
Yes.
Where you have the same word, but they mean something else in different language. So when you talk about words like Abhiman, it's not as if that notion doesn't exist in the other language. Rather, it is more about the same word meaning different in two different languages. So look up the notion of false friends, and you know, the same words hop, skip, jumping, and giving very different meanings in two different languages, where it becomes a major source of mistranslation. If you look at the word réalisateur and you put it something like, you know, thinking that it is to do with realizing something, those are the cases of false friends. It is not as if the notion of direction doesn't exist in English, but they call it direction. But in French, they call it réalisateur or réalisation. And réalisation in English, the same word would be to realize. And there it would be rendre compte.
No, madam, actually, what I wanted to mean, that is this Abhiman in Bangla, actually, in Bengali. That is what I wanted to mean. I was wrong there when I compared it with Hindi. But actually, how to make another person understand who belongs to another language, that Abhiman, that particular word.
When you talk about it, there is something called transliteration also. You explain the notion. You say that
yes,
here I am not talking about being proud of something. It is a notion of being very subtly hurt about something. That is what I mean by Abhiman. So when you're trying to explain a notion which doesn't exist in the other language, either there is a word which also exists in the other language, so you translate and say, okay, so this means this in your language. But if you feel that there is no word explaining the same thing, then you transliterate, you describe, you explain. That's also a way of getting across.
True. Yes.
Yes, Anish.
Ma'am, like adding to Chanchalji's comment, one word I would like to say, like in French, we don't see the word for waist. For waist, they use taille de ceinture or taille de pantalon. There is not a particular word. So when the word in other language doesn't exist, so they also find another way
of course
to elaborate that thing, because the thing exists. Though the word doesn't exist, but the thing exists everywhere. The waist is there. It's a partie du corps. But they call it taille de ceinture. For every body part, this came into my mind. They have,
very true. The notions, they are at times universal, but the terminology accompanying them may or may not exist. So in that case, what happens? There is an artificial creation of that, because the notion has to be expressed. In that case, what you are saying, taille de ceinture, yes, that is one way of artificially creating a new term. There is another way, which is called l'emprunt. You straight away take on from the other language and bring it to your language. Like the word bazaar in Hindi. It has gone on to English, and it's very much a part of the dictionary there now. It's a formal part of the English language, bazaar. It just jumped from here to there. So there was no further elaboration or change. Just the word went from there to there. So these are various ways in which words travel and become part of another language also. Here again, it's the same thing. I hope my screen is visible. It's about what concept is allotted, what's linguistic sign, and if there's a picture of a tree, you're talking about a tree. You use the word ped or vriksh in Hindi, you use tree in English, but you know that is the object with which these linguistic signs are connected. When you say vriksh, you don't imagine a snake. So that is called linguistic convention. And as a child who grows within that linguistic community, the person begins to understand the concepts, the linguistic concepts. And a very important part of language acquisition is the process of negotiation. When a child begins to speak, in the initial days, the child would have all half-assed ways of putting a sentence across. Okay, they would say something like some hibbery-gibbery, and then the adults in the family would come and say, nahi, aise bolo. And then gradually the child would, by the process of negotiation, within a certain span, the child knows ki, okay, that format is not to be used. This is the correct one. So it's a very implicit, a very succinct form of acquiring a language within a linguistic community, that the child begins to learn the language and the correct language. Because the child knows that if he speaks in that hibbery-gibbery thing, the communication won't reach the mom. The mom perhaps won't give him, if the child wants a biscuit and he says something like boom boom, he knows the mom may not understand. The mom actually would understand, I guess. I shouldn't be saying the moms understand everything. But let's say someone else has a biscuit in the hand and the child says boom boom, and that person doesn't understand. So he says biscuit, and then the child knows, okay, that thing is called a biscuit. So in the process of negotiation, the child acquires the correct vocabulary and goes on to, improvise and learn the language in totality. Those are the processes in which language acquisition occurs, and that is through the process of linguistic negotiation. Now, another very important theory, I think this is the last I'll do. After this, you can read on your own and understand. It's a little, not complicated. It's called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. These are two linguists, anthropologists, Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Whorf. They had come up with these theories. They were anthropologists also. And you know what are anthropologists? What are anthropologists? Tell me.
They study humankind.
Yes. They study human civilization, human culture, the way the human life goes on. And largely it is to do with, older practices and a lot of times tribal societies as well. But anthropology is to do with human sciences and the way humans live, how the culture develops. That's part of ethnography and anthropology. So both these, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Whorf, they were ethnographers and anthropologists as well as linguists. So they came up with a very important theory in language. They talked about linguistic determinism and linguistic relativism. What they were trying to say is that it is the lexicon. Lexicon means the vocabulary, the words in a language. They are the ones which determine the reality around you. That is linguistic determinism, in a way that whatever words exist, so do the notions. But they also have this concept, they gave this theory of linguistic relativism, where from culture to culture, because you have a lot more ways to describe a notion or an object, it could be different. The example given in the unit is in Western societies, you just have uncle and aunt. But the kinship terms which are used in Eastern societies, it could, very well, in Indian societies also, you have chacha, chachi, mama, mami, dada, dadi, the much more detailed kinship divisions, and the terminologies also exist. Whereas in Western societies, you just have uncle, aunt, at the maximum paternal aunt, paternal uncle. So language determinism and language relativism, they are the two things these Sapir and Whorf hypotheses have talked about. So you again have to look at it in the cultural context. You read the unit, you should be able to understand it well. And just a little more say, all these theories, in your units, go through them carefully, because you might be asked to talk about them in your term end exams. If someone just asks, I think RC Chennai has had muted me. Can you people hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I think they have been more than subtle in indicating that it's time to push off. They just muted everybody. So I think
Ma'am, it was muted for just 2-3 seconds.
Oh, yes. But I think that was a very subtle way they are indicating it's time to push off. So,
And ma'am, Pardon, last question. There is if the questions come, then will it be as you have said before? That is, we will have to write broad answers of about 450 to 500 words.
See, for your term and exam, the structuration of questions and the revision happens in the month of October. Don't panic. I'll tell you, like for example, some question is of 15 marks. What should you interpret it as? How many words? I'll explain it to you in the month of October so that you're fully prepared to take on the term and exam pattern. Okay? But in the meanwhile, please do your assignments carefully, handwritten, and posted to your regional center. I repeat, Monday after my meeting with the registrar evaluation, I'm going to tell you all about your project and, no more confusions about your assignments. And my apologies once again for this, a little mess with that bit, the administrative bit. I'm trying my best to sort it out. So, well, RC Chennai has been polite enough not to shut us out totally. So before that, I take leave.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Abiyato, ma'am. Thank
Au
you.
revoir, madam. Merci.
Thanks a lot.
Coming weekend, I repeat, there's no class. Coming weekend, no class. We meet again. I'll be communicating on WhatsApp, I'll tell you. Right?
Okay, ma'am. Merci.
Okay, madam.
Au revoir, madam.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Merci.
Merci, madam.
Merci.